I know this has been in your mind, so let's just address the elephant in the room. What happened to the War Within? Like the actual War Within? Is it already over? I want you to think back to 11.0. Anduin saw Azeroth. I mean, that's the world soul that is supposed to be the core of this expansion. We even learned about things like the World Core. Magni got his vision, and Orwena literally worshipped Azeroth's big burning ball. But that all happened before patch 11.1, and since then, silence on those fronts. And now we're blasting off to save an entirely different world. And then Xal'atath, the reason why we've traveled to Kaz-Elgar, is, for 11.2, our short-term ally. Yet, if you think about this expansion, while Xal'atath's story has progressed and things have been set up, it does kind of feel like nothing's happened since 11.0. It almost feels that the originally intended plotline has kinda changed. So, when does this stuff continue? What happened? Where is the rest of the War Within? And why is it that right now, with a full patch and 2 story patches still ahead of us, well, why does the War Within feel like it's already over? And speaking of lore, I've got something incredibly cool. An indie fantasy author who's been playing WoW literally since vanilla dropped, called Michael R. Miller, pitched Songs of Chaos to me as Aragon meets Cradle. So I went to his Goodreads, I saw he's actually got the goods, 4.5-star ratings everywhere, so I said yes to the sponsorship. Which is this. Now, the premise grabbed me of his books, right? A servant discovers that dragons actually murder their weak, kinda like Spartan infanticide. Now, he can't stomach this shit. He steals the egg of a blind dragon, and from that point, everything spirals. I like about the world, though, no prophecy, no chosen one bloodline, it's just 2 outcasts against an undead scourge. And where I'm hooked, what makes it just easy to pick up, is it's pulling from a lot of the same fantasy tradition that made us fall in love with Warcraft back in the first place. But of course, staying boots in the ground, feeling tangible. Our protagonist eventually becomes something like a paladin channeling lunar light instead of holy, mastering crafting professions. And yes, there's an undead threat, but what I love is it feels, yes, familiar, but also quite fresh in a few of the little twists and ways that they're done. It's basically fantasy horror kind of creatures actually done right. Now, I own for the audiobook, and there's a big reason why. I love the Witcher audiobooks. They're narrated by Peter Kenny, and Peter Kenny also narrates these. They're fantastic. And like, your Audible credit gets serious value. Book 1's 18 hours. I think it's 67.5 hours across all of the current books, so perfect for grinds, perfect for your big commute. And also, Book 4 drops September 15th, so now's the perfect time. Hit the link down below, and if you're new to Audible, well, you can also use that free trial credit to grab Ascendant Forever. So, the War Within. What's it about? Well, it's about a war within, and that can have a few different meanings. Of course, there's the whole war within Azeroth's world soul. So, will the Void get Azeroth? Will she wake up? What will happen? All those huge big questions. Maybe it's Anduin's internal conflict, finding the light. Maybe that's the war within. Or maybe it's the war within Illyria. She's trying to control the Void. It could also be the civil wars that we found with the Earthen, the Arathi, and the Nerubians all experiencing infighting. Or maybe it's just, that we were underground. Or maybe it's actually all of those things. And that is, I would say, what the War Within is and was supposed to be. And it kicked off quite strong, right? We see Anduin and Thrall cinematics showing us the World Soul. And then came a slew of other cinematics. We saw Earthen, we saw Nerubians, and then we saw these kind of weird Navi-looking elves who were sure to be very important. I mean, come on, cinematics aren't cheap, especially ones with so much animation. So what was going on? Well, we got to Kaz-Elgar, we spent weeks grinding Valor Stones in the depths, the Haranir did kind of play their part, Magni even got his big payoff for the whole diamond thing. And remember the first time you saw Bellular? I mean, hey, mission accomplished, that war certainly was within. That's the framing that drove the whole expansion, but even then, as we were being wowed by these cool new visuals, it would very soon just stop. We went on to follow the Blackblood storyline from the depths of Azj-Kahet to the campaign finale. That's the finale that happened in the Priory of the Sacred Flame. Illyria realized that the Blackblood was full of old god power. We had our showdown with the big bad, but then Xal'atath reveals that it's all a trap, that we got once again. But Illyria did have her big heroic moment. She manages to crack the Dark Heart, which made Xal'atath rage quit her Priory key. Then, nothing. Basically. I mean, the story that they set up throughout leveling and the endgame kind of just ended. Now, there is patch 11.05. That was a big enough patch, but it was all anniversary. 11.07 brought us to the Siren Isle, a rework of an island expedition. It had phasing tech that kind of foreshadowed what we're going to see in Koresh. And in fairness, it wasn't a total non sequitur. We found these lore tablets that were linked to Bellular that showed us other crystals existing throughout Azeroth, and maybe that'll matter in the future. But as for the War Within, it explained very little. And then we went to Undermine. And I remember Ian saying something specific about this, that the moment they pitched the War Within, he knew they needed to do Undermine. Not purely because it's relevant to the story, but because it's underground and people have kind of wanted it for a long, long time. And yeah, Zal's story kind of went ahead, but not a lot else did for the core 11.0 The War Within experience. Then there's 11.15 Nightfall. That brought us back to the Arathi, but it was light in story. 11.17 did have major lore though. We learned Xalatat's origin and the broker's connection to Koresh. We took a trip to the Arathi Highlands with Faerun, but the War Within Khazalgar, the stuff with the World Soul, it's all just locked in stasis, which highlights the core problem. Take Faerun Lothar as an example. She was clearly set up to have a major role in all of that War Within stuff with her and Anduin and maybe Beladar, but instead she pretty much went on to do nothing, and we haven't really seen a lot of Anduin either. There's the whole pretty controversial Red Dawn storyline that was, again, like related to her background lore, but it didn't really push the core War Within narrative forward that much. Which is to say, it's all been kind of bizarre. And it cuts to the tension the plot feels right now. Do they wrap up the core expansion narratives, or do they focus on setting up the World Soul saga? It basically seems there isn't, and hasn't been, enough time or space to do both of those things. So what happens? Well, Faerun gets her set up, then we blast off to Koresh. The War Within stuff is just left behind us, and the new content, and where we're going, doesn't actually feel like it's connected to the core expansion. But here's the thing, this is all actually happening for a reason. It is all to serve the World Soul saga, which was not Blizzard's original plan. So let's talk about that. Okay, now for the bitter medicine. So we were kind of told this would happen. I think they've seen this coming. Basically, pre-launch, Metzen gave us his, full charisma, creative director, Loktar, big gruff voice man, big director pitch, right? Got everyone excited at BlizzCon. Now in that, he talked about the World Soul saga, and he said it was the culmination of decades of storytelling, that Xalatath would, say, dip in and out as a villain, and that would set up the next 20 years. All that good stuff. But he didn't talk that much about the War Within. And he actually told us, and this is a direct quote, that it wouldn't feel like a full meal. So yeah, that's pretty self-aware. I guess a bit of a way to soften the blow or to contextualize things. You see, you could say that the War Within had to set up the saga, which inherently meant that it would be hard for this expansion to feel complete. But I really do think that's a weak excuse. 11.1 sure as hell wasn't setting up the saga. You could have used that time better. Why did you choose to kind of do a random side quest just because it was cool at the time? I think there's actually a clear answer here. Production. And I'm currently working on a deep dive video on the production timeline things from everything that I know, but for now, the short version is that whenever Chris Metzen rejoined Blizzard, The War Within was 8 months into development, and that means that core content, so big locations, things that are done way, way, way in advance, like say Undermine, well, those all would have been locked in. And we actually know that the original War Within was meant to finish the entire World Soul arc, right, with Azeroth. We even got that early concept art where you can see her body. And remember, that's not rumors. Chris Metzen directly said that whenever he returned, World Soul Saga wasn't supposed to be a thing, they hadn't thought about it yet, and the War Within was basically intended to cover this entire arc with Azeroth. So with him coming in and World Soul Saga becoming a thing, that then changed the development plans, at least from whatever ones existed, when the War Within was first pitched, went through pre-production, and begun its production. Now, that may seem like a whole bunch of excuses. I would rather say that they're explanations, and we know that the War Within was, the same creative direction, the same creative vibes as, Dragonflight. Which, for all the ways that it was way better as a game, and did have some really good bright spots for the lore, also did have some low lows and a hell of a lot of cringe. And it's that leads me to the big question. Where's all our stuff? Let me break it down. So the expansion launched, and the Harrenir were presented as a core element. We then found them quickly in Azj-Kahet. They introduced us to the Black Blood. It was poisoning their homeland, and Orwena was sent by Azeroth herself to figure out what was wrong. But the Harrenir, broadly, did not support her. She was painted as a rebel and clearly as a character with huge story potential, and we even found a full suite of character customization options. That drove speculation about a new allied race, obviously one that we haven't got. And then we found the entrance to their homeworld. Here it is, you can actually fly into it, and when you do, you see that it's gated by an Emerald Dream sleep barrier. It became abundantly clear that the Harrenir had a connection to the Emerald Dream, and there is loads of deep lore that even connects them to Elune and a whole bunch of narrative stuff that, at least in Dragonflight, Blizzard were setting up. So the Harrenir existing within that context does actually make a lot of production sense. So we figured all that stuff out, and before Undermine, Orwena got this huge shot. This is her right in front of the World Soul. But funnily enough, that's when she kind of peaked. She then just became a side character in the patch 11.1 story, just a bat used to spy on some goblins or to tell us how terrible it was that they were using the Black Blood. And since then, nothing. No Orwena, no Harrenir, and not even a peep from the World Soul. The last time we heard from Azeroth herself was in the patch 10.0.7 quests, the ones that were linking us into Undermine. We got visions of drilling machines and those machines connected to the Goblin capital. But it's been months without a story beat involving the World Soul, even though we've had numerous other patches. And that does fray the notion that the War Within was kind of all about her, that Orwena would have been a proper major character, one worthy of a humongous and expensive feature in the big cinematic. But as of right now, we're moving into 11.2, Ghosts of Koresh, the final major patch. And yes, it is about a World Soul, and I suppose there was a bit of a war within for them, but it's not our World Soul and not our war within. Now, I'm pretty happy that we're going there, and I think it'll be setting up some really cool things for Midnight. But if that's what that patch is doing, it means that patch 11.2.5 and 11.2.7 will have to do a lot of heavy lifting. They'll basically have to make the whole War Within thing actually come to some form of resolution. Now, I could be wrong, and this is a bit of speculation, but I think that those patches have basically got to achieve the narrative job of a major content patch. But even with that, I think it's unlikely that the Harrenir will matter that much beyond the War Within. And that brings me back to all the stuff that we found in Khazal-Gar. When will any of that be relevant? You know, a Nerubian kingdom subjugated by a mad queen who is now dead. You've got the faction that we helped, the Severed Threads. Are they in control? Will that matter again? Perhaps it'll matter in the Last Titan when we return to Azul Narub, maybe? There's the whole thing of the two missing keepers under Dornegal, Dornick and Galen. We don't really know anything other than that they were dragged away during the theater event. And they're no minor plot thread. We were told that Arcadis reprogrammed one of them for a super secret mission, which totally is teasing something, but that mission has not been revealed. And all that Earthen lore is in a funny place. Are they going the way of allied races? You know, only pulled into content when a developer remembers that they exist? It's hard to see them being integrated into the future. I mean, the only story I think we can be confident will matter soon is that of the Arathi, because, well, they worship the light, and the light will be a huge factor in the Midnight expansion. But I think you see the problem. 2 minor story patches after Koresh, and all of these dangling plot threads from Khazal-Gar. And all of that where Blizzard still will need to set up the Midnight expansion. Okay, let's talk about why. Maybe the War Within feels finished because we've left Khazal-Gar in the dust and it's just not that relevant. We've finished the endgame campaign and simply moved on. Or maybe all this stuff will wrap up in a way that nobody expects. Maybe it'll launch us into an unforgettable duo of expansions, but for right now, War Within feels done, and I think I know why. A lot of that Metzen stuff that I detailed earlier on. But there is something to add to that. The Rootlands. This was a region that appeared in early beta build data mining. Now, do remember, we know Blizzard's original plan was to finish the World Soul story within this one expansion. Then Metzen returns, and 8 months into the development of this expansion, they change their plan, because basically Midnight and the Last Titan are framed as part of this 3 expansion saga. Essentially, Metzen just said, you can't do the story of Azeroth justice within just one expansion. I'd add to that doubly so when you invest loads of resources into a goblin patch that feels barely relevant. Little bit odd. Now, what we can do from here is look at the 11.0 that we got, because that will represent what they were heavily into production of whenever Metzen returned, right? So we can take that, we can add to it the knowledge that they did intend to finish the whole Azeroth storyline in just this one expansion, and then we can think about, well, the Rootlands data mining. So it seems to me that visiting the Rootlands and meeting Azeroth in a Haranir-centric final major patch would have let them do that. Basically, I think that's what the original plan was. So with that in mind, we can think about the position that this development team was in whenever Metzen returned and they changed their overall plans. I think the idea of cutting a Haranir patch in an attempt to set up Midnight by doing Koresh does actually make a fair amount of sense. And it does explain why some plot things have really not mattered as much as we thought they would. And just to highlight the types of timelines we're working on here, I met Ian and Holly in an event in London a few months back. It was for the big anniversary. And unfortunately, right, camera footage was corrupted for the interview, which is why there's no interview, which really did suck. But here's what I learned. They were actually making content for the final patch of the Midnight expansion. That's the sort of stuff that back then they, the sorts of meetings that the two of them were in. So that is the final patch of an expansion that is going to be revealed August 19th this year. So you can see what the sorts of timelines are actually being dealt with. And I think that with all we've covered in this video, plus that context, essentially, it makes sense why, yes, the War Within feels over, like it just kind of stopped. But at least I think there is a lot of potential to take some of the elements that they've introduced, like the Titan stuff and the Haranir, and work them into future plot lines. And if you do want more of an idea of what Midnight will actually be like based on the latest lore we've discovered, you can check out this video next.